Thank you very much for coming. Our Secretary General is working in, so now we can start. Thank you very much for coming to this panel discussion. Before I give the floor to our Secretary General to welcome you all to Stromsborg, I just wanted to highlight why we are here, what the topic is today. As you all know, and it's been discussed everywhere nowadays, today most citizens endorse democracy, but I expect much more than a periodic opportunity at the ballot box. These citizens have access to an expanding repertoire of mechanisms to express criticism and influence political processes. These mechanisms can be participatory, deliberative, or direct. And today we are here to explore the key question: does political participation need political parties and representation? And to explore this topic, I have four panelists here with me. One on blue jeans, in alphabetical order, Mr. Christian Holm Barenfeld, Member of Parliament from the Moderate Party, representing Värmland. Mr. Benedikt Hugosson, the Director of Voter Contact and Engagement with the Swedish Social Democrats. Mr. Bruno Kaufmann, Chairperson of the Initiative and Referendum Institute Europe, and co-president of Global Forum on Direct Democracy. Professor Pippa Norris, who couldn't be with us here physically, but thanks to ICT is able to join us online. Professor Norris is probably known to many of you. She is a Maguire Lecturer in Comparative Politics at the J.F. Kennedy School of Government at the Harvard University, and International IDEA board member. And we will also have two speakers. First, Mr. Yves Latem, who is the Secretary General of International IDEA, who will give us welcoming remarks, and then we will be given closing remarks by the Chairperson of the Board of Advisors of International IDEA, Dr. Surin Pitsuan, who is also the former Executive Secretary of ASEAN. So without wasting much time, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yves Latem to give us welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Keb. I will be very brief. I think the most important things have been said, but on behalf of International IDEA, warmly welcome to all of you, and thank you for the big interest in this afternoon meeting, which we typically organize at the end of our 2 days session with our Board of Advisors. Board of Advisors, something like 10 people coming from all over the globe, former senior politicians or academic people that advise us on the policy of International IDEA. You're here on the island we are very pleased to use to host our headquarters here of International IDEA, 21 years old, the government organization, launched to promote democracy in different aspects, where we work on electoral affairs, electoral assistance. That's why it's called IDEA. We work on constitution building, but very importantly also we do research, and we have country programs where we focus on activities to strengthen the aspect of democracy related to participation, structuring the interaction between citizens and leadership, public authorities. And that's all about citizens' participation, civil society, capacitating people to hold leaders accountable, and there, of course, in that interaction between citizens and political leadership, political parties play a very important role. Until now, I would say. Let's think about what happened 2 days ago or 3 days ago, Sunday, for the first time since the Second World War. The two final candidates in France for the presidency are two people that very openly took distance of the whole of the party system. And there was even a third one in the five major candidates and the traditional parties participating in the elections in France. They got something like together. If you put the results of the Parti Socialiste and the Républicain together, you reach a result of something like 25%. So only 25% of the voters voted for candidates that have been representing and should represent traditionally political parties that are structured, that have activities in almost all the 36,000 municipalities in France, that have a program, that have membership, that have regular meetings in congresses where they discuss issues, that on a weekly basis comment what's happening in the country. So only 25% of the voters gave their confidence to the leaders to the people representing these parties. And France is not an exception. We recently also saw that in Spain, people starting from different platforms than a political party could reach, in a very short period of time, an electoral result of 15, 17%. And in other parts of the globe, India, to just name one example, we also saw that people from starting from scratch, so to say, in a very short time, can develop a program, can develop a very attractive proposal where lots of voters decide to choose for. So the question is, this structure, typically 20th century invention of political parties with broad membership, the mass, what we used to call the mass political parties. I hesitate a bit because the membership of these mass political parties is actually imploding. Well, you could put a question mark whether these structures are still adapted. I think personally you always need something to structure the interaction between citizens and let's say the people that are candidate, because these have to run based on a content-wise on a platform. And when there are more seats, they're competing for parliamentary seats, you typically would have lists of candidates. But our political parties also today and tomorrow, the main actors, also beyond elections in, let's say, normal times, to form the public opinion, to attract people for ideas, for proposals related to policy. I think that's the core of the debate this afternoon. We are very pleased to organize this under the leadership of Keboitse, the Director of Global Programs of International ID, with the help of, once again, of the Swedish government. I just would like to add, as a matter of information, before handing over to you again, Keboitse, that we not only will try to find an answer to the question about the future positioning of political parties this afternoon, but that this also will be one of the items that will be developed in the new publication we will publish, I think, in November. Thanks also to the support of the Swedish government. Broadly defined as a publication depicting the state of democracy worldwide. And so also in that very ambitious publication, flagship publication for International ID, future flagship publication for our organization, the role, the current, present role all over the globe of political parties will be very much at the center of some of the chapters of the State of Democracy publication. So to conclude, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for all the people that made this possible, and looking forward to interesting interventions and to a debate. It's time to stop from the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laten. And before I ask the first question to the first panelist, and our first panelist who is going to be Professor Norris. But before I do that, I thought I should just outline the process, how we are going to do this. And already my secretary has introduced me. I realized that I had introduced everyone else except myself. My name is Keboitse Machanga, and I'm the Director of Global Program here at International IDEA, and I will be moderating this session. Before we start, I just want to highlight that the idea behind this seminar is that it will be an interactive session, and therefore we will have each panelist in the beginning sort of outline their key points which they would like to make in relation to the topic on the basis of the questions that I will ask them. And then when they finish, I will open the floor for comments. And I want to just take this opportunity to appeal to all of you that as we will be asking questions and commenting, just so that we can all have an opportunity to comment, let's make sure that we are more specific and precise in terms of our questions, and we are brief in terms of our interventions, so that more people can have an opportunity to make comments, and also we can have the panelists also giving their perspectives on the issues that you will raise. I also just want to acknowledge that this seminar has also been put together. It's being co-hosted also with the Swiss embassy here in Stockholm, and the figure that we are all having today is at the support of the Swiss embassy here in Stockholm. So we want to really thank you for that support. So to you, Professor Norris, in your most recent contribution, and Professor Norris' paper is out there in the table with other publications if you want to pick it up later. In your most recent contribution to the debate on whether democracy is backsliding, you argue that there is no evidence that political rights are deteriorating in the US and Europe, but the rise of authoritarian populists does challenge democracy. And you also found in your most recent work that, for instance, in the US, younger generations value democracy positively, but they give more value to alternative forms of engagement, understood as alternative to voting, for instance. Does this mean that democracy of the future is more participatory and deliberative? And please tell us how. Oh, wait, we can't hear you. Can you just wait for a second?
You can't?
Yeah, okay.
Sure. Okay, 1, 2, 3. How is that working?
Yes. You have 5 minutes to outline your points.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you very much, Yves. I so apologise I can't be with you. It's our last day at Harvard for teaching, so difficult to get away. So what are the challenges? I mean, Yves very much emphasises the issues going on, in particular the rise of populism in Western Europe. We can think about Brexit, we can think about France, we can think about Germany and the Netherlands, and in particular the populist challengers have really been making major headway, even if not pushing through, and of course in America with Trump. Worldwide, there are of course even broader challenges. Think about the issues of how democracy is under threat or is declining, with authoritarian resurgence in Hungary, in Poland, in places like Turkey, Venezuela, the Philippines. So what's going on, and how far is it parties which are weakening at the heart of this phenomenon, particularly in presidential systems where you see sudden new challenges arise? So in the research, what I did was I focused in particular on a classic to think about this issue. And it's the work of that eminent sociologist Joanne Lintz and Alf Steffen. And what they said some time ago now is that in consolidated democracies, if there's a real problem in the quality of democracy, it should come out about 3 things. So the first is a cultural challenge, and in particular, if young people, the younger generation, and others no longer support the values of democracy, the principles, the ideals, if people are becoming disillusioned, then that's a major problem. But what I find is that the evidence is somewhat mixed, and that even though there's a lot of debate about this in the Journal of Democracy, we shouldn't overemphasize this. There are ups and downs depending on the country, depending on the group, but it's not the case that young people are very disillusioned with basic democratic values. The second challenge could be if democracies no longer have adherence to constitutional values. So, for example, threats to the courts, threats to the media in particular. And we can certainly see that in some of the countries I've mentioned. In Venezuela recently, for example, there was an attempt to push back on the assembly. In Hungary, the new constitutional arrangements are very worrying for the quality of democracy. And you can see similar threats in Turkey, just very recently, with the strengthening of presidential powers. But in Western democracies, in Europe, you don't see those threats. And in America, there certainly are threats in the rhetoric of Donald Trump, but so far there's been pushback, very effective, from the media, which has been a very strong critic, from the courts, the most recent decision, for example, which has pushed back, and also from civil society, which has been organising. The most recent one, the March for Science, with millions of people turning out. The third challenge to Western democracies is not about values or constitutions, it's about populism. And if there's a party which is not willing to play by the rules of the game. And here I do think there's a serious threat. The rise in support in seats and votes in populist parties across most West European countries and its phenomena elsewhere is a challenge to the legitimacy of liberal democracy and, of course, to mainstream parties, as Yves says. And this has occurred in countries as diverse as Switzerland, Sweden, the Netherlands, France, in Germany with the AfD, and in many other countries as well. So I think if there's one issue that we need to worry about, it's partly the decline in the membership of mass parties, as Yves says, which leaves a vacuum, but it's very much the growth of populist parties, which can be flash phenomena. They can go up and they can go down, but the way in which they challenge the legitimacy of representative democracy by claiming that all legitimacy comes from popular sovereignty. In Britain, for example, with Brexit, it was argued that Parliament didn't have a role to debate Brexit because the people had spoken through referendum. And that is an issue which I think really is a challenge. Potentially it can have positive impacts on democracy, challenging established elites like corporate power or like the role of money in politics, arguing that there's corruption is an important democratic value. But if it brings about strongmen politics, so what populism does is it weakens the old checks and balances, and it allows an individual who wants to go against some of those checks and balances to really rule in a very strong way. That, I think, is a major challenge, and I very much welcome the comments of the rest of the speakers in the panel to really learn how they see the challenges, and in particular what we do to respond to the new populist threats, which is not at all easy and not at all self-evident. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Norris, for outlining that. Like I said before, her paper is on the table there if you would like to read more about some of these points that she's raising. But now I want to turn to Mr. Kaufmann, Bruno Kaufmann, who works a lot with referenda. You work a lot on issues also of citizen engagement. And Pippa also in her paper, Professor Norris refers to the growing interest, perhaps more strongly in younger generations, to alternative forms of civic engagement. And I just want you to share your reflections on how can government strengthen both direct and participatory mechanisms to make them more accessible and citizen-friendly. And while we are there, can you also talk a little bit about plebiscites, because they seem to be getting more and more popular, but we are also seeing that what has now come to be known as authoritarian populists also like plebiscites, and they are using them, at least there's a perception that they are using them to circumvent real deliberation of issues and to circumvent institutions of representation. Can you speak to that?
Thank you very much. It's obvious that the developments in the last 10 years have led to a growing interest in using participatory and direct democratic tools. I mean, it's not a new phenomenon. Obviously, my country, Switzerland, has developed these tools and used them for more than 100 years. And in many places around the world, this is the same case. But what we have seen in recent years is indeed a growing use of popular votes on issues to be used in different ways. And you can say that this big interest in politics, this growing engagement, this is a very positive thing, of course. We can talk about the return of politics. In fact, after the financial crisis of 2008, when the boring time ended and more and more people got engaged again. We have seen in recent elections all over the world growing participation rates. For a long time there has been a discussion about that people don't participate anymore in elections and other votes, but this has changed, and we can also see a growing representation of different kind of interests in elections. In many countries there are not just 3-4 parties anymore, there are maybe 5 to 10 where many parties enter parliament as well. This is of course a challenge to creating governments, but at the same time it's also a good thing for representation. Now, this return of politics, this can be, of course, a very good thing for democracy, as Pippa Norris has said, but it can also be a threatening thing, because all the time when you have, the wind is coming, all the time when you have more voices, when you have more interests represented, of course, the spectrum of ideas how to implement, to use democracy also grows bigger. So we are in a way today, you can say, stuck with a paternalistic form of government while we are living in a post-paternalistic age. Or you could also say we are living in a post-hegemonic age, stuck with hegemonic leaders. So there is a cultural confrontation there, which is about how to make democracy more democratic, or you can also say how to make representative democracy more representative. And there it's very obvious that we have two fundamental opposed forms of using popular votes. We have, as it has been said, what you could say is a populist threat, but sometimes also an elitist one. It's a top-down instrumentalization of let's say, participatory tools in the sole interest of elected power holders. There is a tradition, of course, for instance, in France with this, that only the president can call a popular vote a referendum. We have seen it in the United Kingdom. We have now seen several examples also, like in Hungary, or in a way also in Turkey, where you can say leaders, elected leaders, try to use this process of popular vote by the people to bypass representative democracy and, in fact, a parliament. So in that way, of course, this kind of tools doesn't make representation bigger or representative democracy more representative. But on the other side, you have also, and this, for instance, the data of International IDEA gathered in the last 15 years show there is an enormous amount of well-designed tools of direct democracy and participation being implemented in many, many countries around the world. According to the IDEA data, in fact, about 180 countries out of 230 countries and territories do know some use of direct democracy with initiatives and referendums. But the key issue is really how to use them, how to implement them. And already several years ago, the Council of Europe made clear recommendations that when you use, for instance, a referendum, it shouldn't be a plebiscite. And that's a very important difference. A referendum is based on a law, it's based on a constitutional provision, it's regulated when it comes to the rules, like an election in positive cases. But plebiscites often are ad hoc, they are often advisory, they are open to manipulative ways of bypassing parliaments. So, including in that also, you can say this having like advisory referendums is of course a very stupid thing. It's like having advisory elections. You promise to the voters something which cannot really be fulfilled, and it opens up to all kinds of problems, like we have seen now, for instance, with Brexit, which was a general wish to leave the European Union, but there was no real law about leaving the Union. That has to be done as a consequence, and it opens up to a lot of power battles. So, in fact, it's very important to see this participatory turn, you can say, which is also linked a little bit to the digital turn we have seen in politics, that people are using digital means of participation much more than before, and additionally also a transnational turn of politics, including, for instance, democratic features on the European Union level. In sum, you can say that it's a lot of opportunities out there for, you can say, more democracy, but there are also a lot of challenges to it, and we have to be very conscious about that government in power don't instrumentalize these kind of tools, but in contrary contribute to infrastructure of well-educated electorates through civic education, but also by ensuring that the process of decision making is not confused with the process of getting one or another result. I want to sum up that with what we have seen, for instance, in the Turkish referendum recently on the constitutional changes, is in fact a referendum according to the rules. It's a referendum which has a clear, you can say, process of being conducted, but at the same time you have a context which is profoundly undemocratic, where those who have been opposed have been delegitimized, they have been put to prison, and of course in that way you cannot just look on the process of a referendum as such, you have to look on the context. And I really hope that this discussion we see now will create, as we have seen for free and fair elections, understanding that free and fair initiatives and referendums in the future need much more of our concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufmann. I think you raised quite an important issue of the idea that the participation that we are seeing, which is rising, is also about deepening, making democracy more democratic. I think I like that very much. And I think for the challenge for organizations like International IDEA that are in democracy assistance is essentially how to read what is happening and what the media is churning out every day, because a lot of the discussion is about democracy is in decline, while at the same time, on the other hand, we are seeing a lot more participation. So how do we balance that? How can we sift essentially what are just more the headlines from really what is fact? I don't want you to deal with it now, but later perhaps also with Professor Norris you can engage. How can democracy assistance organizations like International IDEA be able to deal with this context that on one hand you have good participation, especially among the young, which is supposed to be good for democracy, but on the other hand we are seeing that this participation is also not being used in ways that support democracy. How do we balance that? With that, and hold that thought, while we are there, I would like to turn to you, Mr. Christian Barenfeld from the Moderate Party. That in Sweden is known as one of, is known as one of the egalitarian societies in the world, and citizens seem to be fairly satisfied with democracy here in Sweden, as shown by the fact that the voter turnout is still above average. The recent youth barometer finds that 42% of young Swiss aged between 15 and 24 are greatly interested in politics. And this is an increase from 14 years ago, where it was 28%. However, they have the lowest confidence in political parties. What are political parties in Sweden, in particular your party, the Moderates, doing to take advantage of this renewed potential for political engagement by the young people?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation to participate here. I think IDEA has an important role and is an important institution when it comes to democracy support and electoral support and assistance. And I just came here from a board meeting with our Political Democracy Foundation that we had before, where we mostly discussed situations in countries like Venezuela, Belarus, and so on, where we work with supporting democratic movements. I think, Sweden is, as you said, an egalitarian society, and we can and we should be proud of that, and we should do what we can to preserve and further develop it, of course. And the fact that many young people show an interest in politics is both important for democracy and in our country, and also an opportunity, of course, for all of our political parties. it's normally also so that the party who are the best one to encourage young people to vote for them are normally the ones who win the elections. And I think that there are many young people who are interested in politics, not necessarily interested in participation in political parties. They might be interested in one or two or a number of political issues rather than buying the whole concept of a party. They might join civil society movements and other things. We also have a very high information flow today with online news, always the latest. We have a lot of social media, which makes it possible for people to be well informed and updated. And I believe that is a very good development. At the same time, we have right now very much discussions about fake news, whether the word comes from a president or from other people. And I think we need to be aware of that and also make sure that our sources are good. Without a doubt, this has been a challenge for the established parties to follow and to be leading in social media, and populist movements, populist parties have been a lot better to win support through those channels than the established parties. I also think that we have a challenge within the established parties, if I could call us that, to be relevant to people in general, but not least to young people. Why should they join a political party if they have a political interest? And I'm not sure that is always a natural thing among young people, that I have an opinion, I join a political party. Some of us did. But I think I'm not. Well, you have the statistics. I just have what I can feel when I'm out meeting with people. But I think being out in schools or other areas where you have a lot of young people, I think you can actually feel that there are a real interest in political issues. But at the same time, you can see that not all political parties are increasing in members. But we do have a lot of things to do, I think, when it comes to working methods, to organizational structures. Which barriers do we have to get in the political parties? There is maybe, well, in some areas it can take a long time. You have to work politically to reach higher in the politics, and some young people, I think, are less patience there, and they want results directly and find other ways. And there, I think that political parties need to think and partly also rethink. But however, I also do believe that we need to be trustworthy when it comes to our politics and how we do it. Because even if we are in times with populist parties and so on, I think we need political parties with substance, that are based on values and ideas, that are ready to deliver. Because when we work in a business of confidence, we need to be clear what do we want to do, why do we want to do it, and how do we want to do it. And when we get in power and get the possibility to do it, we also need to deliver. Because if we promise a lot and don't keep those promises, well, people won't believe in us in the future. And I think this is extra important in this time of turbulence and populism. Well, we have Brexit, we have the presidential election in the US, we have France, and a lot of other things mentioned. And I think that is something that we need to continue to work with. I think the importance of functioning institutions and functioning political parties gets even more important when we see these tendencies. Basically, all countries that are well functioning, all countries that have a functioning democracy, have stable institutions and solid political parties. But we can see that we are challenged now. When it comes to referendums, I might be a little bit more restrictive than Mr. Kaufman, because I think it's also a risk. We have advisory referendums in Sweden, and they are just advisory. The problem with referendum is it's very easy to get support for something that are costing a lot. When you want to do something, well, then it's very efficient. But if you want to do savings, very few people would vote for it. So it's also a possibility to increase populism with the tool referendum. On the other hand, there are times when there are reasons to have referendums, not least in between elections. If you do major changes, they might not be constitutional because then you have the constitution, but that are of great importance and that the voters haven't had the possibility to take a stand in an election. But I suppose we will have the possibility to discuss more about this during the coming hour. So I stop there, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barenfeld. I think another question that I'll just put to the panelists for later as you pick up also additional questions from the floor is that you raise also another important question, important issue about the need for stable institutions, because in order for policies and programs to be implemented, you need stable policies. But the key question is, how do we do that in a context where we have a populace that doesn't want to be tied down to these institutions? I think it's the key question that still remains. And with that, I would like to turn to you, Mr. Benedict Hugosen, from the Social Democrats. And I think this time around, this is quite a good panel because we do have political parties. We're not talking about political parties. You are present and you can give us insights into some of these issues that we often try to grapple with, and because we are not necessarily on a day-to-day in political parties, perhaps we are missing something. And I understand that you are the Director of Voter Contact and Engagement within your party. And from that position, it means that you must be the person who contacts people every day, even those that are not within your party, and you are able to analyze their attitudes towards issues, towards developments around the world and within Sweden, and also towards the government. In your view, do people really want to become active, especially in relation to political party, in relation to the parties? And we are aware that your party recently also adopted a strategy wanting to reinvent itself into a party of the future. Can you also talk a bit about that? In what ways are you planning to improve that sort of engagement? Especially, in fact, in terms of the key question that I just asked about the fact that, yes, as your colleague has just said, political parties are important because they offer policies and we need stability. But at the same time, we are working with a populace that doesn't want to be tied down to political parties. So how do you engage?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Like you said, I'm Director of Voter Contact and Engagement for the Social Democrats, and it does actually mean that I'm out quite a bit and actually talking to people. Recently I was in Dalarna, I was talking to people there, going into different areas and actually sort of talking to them about their everyday issues and what they have. But it doesn't mean that I'm doing all the talking, which, thank God, we have lots of members that are doing that. But I think one of the issues that our party is facing, and I think a lot of parties are facing it, is the idea of how we get people involved. And the question is do people want to get involved? Mm-hmm. And I think that question actually has a lot of sort of assumptions built in, and that is that people already now understand that they want to get involved in politics. And I think that there are a lot of people doing, and I think there is a professor that has done a lot of studies in regards to this, especially within Sweden, and he talks about the idea of standby citizens. He talks about this big group of people that are about 46% of the population that will get involved in politics if we actually give them an avenue to get involved. So I think that there are a lot of people that do want to get involved, and we're talking here not just about political parties. And I think but we could actually sort of ask this question another way as well. I think that we could say, how do we get more people involved? And here we're starting to talk about those people that don't have a need to get involved today, that probably could get involved. And I think that these people are a huge group that we need to actually start to address. One of the things that struck me when I was out during the election in 2014 talking to people was that there is a large group of elderly people that live in poverty, basically. They're alone. And I think that they're not the only example of people that have some form of social problem or have some problem that they experience in their lives. And I think that what we need to start doing is actually start asking the question not who wants to get involved, but who are our people? Who should we get involved to solve these problems? And I think that we need to sort of see political parties not just as a transaction for people. I think we need to start not sort of like deliver relevant policies, but maybe sort of take it a step further as well and turn it into a transformative process as well for society. And I think what we need to do is we need to start getting out in society and building relationships with everyday people and start engaging them in ways that are meaningful for them. And in that way actually giving them power over their own lives. And I think that's very, very empowering for a society. I think the last time we saw that on a mass scale was the Obama 2008 campaign. And what did they do? They went out and they didn't just mobilise society, they organised society. And they got people to work out, starting with their values, got them to develop a common purpose and actually work towards that common purpose. I think oftentimes political parties maybe have their campaigns and things like that, but they don't actually show people how to create change. What they do is they say, let's go out and build opinion. And I mean, for a lot of people, that's very disempowering because it's very abstract. What we need to do is we need to start telling people how they actually take control over their lives, and via political parties being able to do this. And I think political parties are great in that they are actually sort of groupings out of with values. You know, there are certain sort of values that we hold as social democrats, and that's a great sort of point to start when we start organising people out in the local community. And I think a good example of this about sort of taking people outside of politics and bringing them in is the Bernie Sanders campaign. There was a great research report done on the people that were very active for the Bernie Sanders campaign and people that were very active for the Hillary Clinton campaign. And what they did is they went into Reddit, which is a big site in the US. And they started looking at what people in the Hillary campaign were talking about, you know, a couple of years before the campaign. And they were talking about feminist issues, they were talking about, you know, political issues. And then they went into the Bernie Sanders group and started looking at them. And, you know, part of them were coming from the Occupy Wall Street group, but a lot of them were talking about things like astronomy, which I think is very striking, because there was a large group of people there that before Bernie Sanders came along wasn't actually thinking about politics at all. They were thinking about astronomy and the stars and dreaming about some other place. But what Bernie Sanders did is he said, okay, well, if we're going to win this thing, we have to be sort of like, we have to create a mass movement. And he didn't ask people for like these incremental changes. He said, you know, we have to do something big here to actually do it. We have to topple the candidate that everybody thinks is going to win. And he created a tremendous movement to do that. And I think that these are the questions that we have to start asking, is not who are prepared to be active today, but who aren't, and how can we get them involved. And I think, you know, this is a question that a lot of organisations, not just political parties, are grappling with. We have this, so since the 70s we've had TV, and then came social media. And basically these mediums have been great for mobilising. They haven't been particularly great for organising. In fact, often they're moving organising out of the picture and actually placing a lot of focus on mobilising. And what we're finding is, and there's a great book by a researcher called Hari Hahn, How Organisations Develop Activists. And basically what she finds is those organisations that have more members, doing more activities, they are the ones that both work with mobilising and organising. But the ones that work primarily with mobilising, they don't have so many members. They're not so active. And I think one of the first steps is actually to define what is the difference between mobilising and organising. And, you know, organising is developing leaders, where mobilising is sort of like, you know, sending out Facebook content. And organising means that we have to sort of not only broaden the party, but deepen the party. You know, how do we develop all leaders? How do we give them responsibility? How do we incorporate them into the political process so they can actually make change? Not just sort of stand there when politicians make change, but actually bring them into the process, and how do they help us actually make that change? So one of the things that the Social Democrats have done is like you said, working with this idea of Framtidspartiet, or the future party. And so basically the name started as a working sort of title internally, but it said a lot about what we wanted to do, about sort of how do we adapt. And a large part of that, especially from an engagement perspective, is about creating leaders. giving them resources, actually putting money in them, and actually trusting them to go out and change the party. Change it to that party that we want to be. We want to be open, we want to engage people, we want to sort of give them power to create change. And I think that project which we've done is we're still in the early phases because we've only started it for a couple of years ago, and we see it as a long-term strategy. But we see that it is actually sort of opening up the party, creating a new culture for the party to actually grow into the future. I can end with one point, and that is that if we look at the political parties today, those that have the most members in regards to the amount of votes that they get, and we see that there are a couple of parties that stick out. One of them is the Christian Democrats. They have a lot of voters. The other one is the Social Democrats. We have a lot of members, and what's interesting with these two parties is that they actually rely on structures that are already in place. The Christian Democrats have the churches. There's people that sort of congregate of a Sunday, and they can go in there and actually sort of organise those people. We have workplaces. We grew out of the labour movement, and I think that we can't overlook that aspect as well. This structural nature of certain political parties actually means that they can generate more members, and I think that we have to start looking at that a lot more.
Thank you very much. Although there are others who would argue that because some of the structures where these parties have been drawing membership from are themselves experiencing a decline in membership, like churches. So what then is the future of these political parties if they are the basis from which they are also drawing membership are also not having the sort of activism that we are seeing as from the past? But I think you raise very important questions that I would also like the panelists to also speak to. One of them, for example, being the issue of relationship between political parties and the membership. And I think it's a very important one because you bring in the issue of how can we make politics an everyday issues rather than the way it is often understood and couched as if, there are people on one side and then there are those who practice politics on the other side. How can it be just a normal way of politics and political issues be just about everyday engagement and everyday issues that people care about? And I think the issue of relationship, because in some regions actually that is a big problem where people will say, we see our politicians only, I think, for what you call mobilizing, only 6 months before an election when they are looking for us to cast a vote, but then we never see them again until the next election. So I think that is a very important issue that you are raising. But before I open the floor, I would like to just give you, each one of you, 1.5 minutes to just address whatever issue that you think you would like to address. Professor Norris?
So I think that the discussion has been really interesting, but I think we also need to consider that parties exist at 3 levels. One is in government, one is as organisations, as one is in the electorate. And what I think we might think about is that some of the developments which are going on may mobilise people in the electorate. For example, when you get a populist party, you get a move towards the extremes. Think about France and the choice between Mélenchon on the one hand and Le Pen. That really mobilised people. But of course, if either candidate had got into government, if either had been elected as president, and Macron to some extent has this challenge, there are real issues about how you then translate that into any form of stable policy making on a collective basis with continuity, with accountability, and with all those other things. Similarly, some of the issues that have happened in Britain with Brexit have divided parties deeply and really created problems in governance. And you can see the similar issues going on right now in America, where Trump's election taking over one party did mobilise people, and it's mobilised both sides. People are extremely excited by his election who are supporting him. The opponents have been totally mobilised in civil society to an extent I haven't seen in my lifetime. But the challenges are then, how do you get any form of stable, accountable policy making? So there's a trade-off to some extent between real activism and getting people mobilised, which often happens when the parties move to the extreme, and governance where you need collective accountability and stability and predictability and all these other forms of representation. So participation is one aspect, governance is another.
Thank you very much. Yes, and it does also bring in this question of, shall we, given that we are saying mobilizing is not everything, should we expect that in the near future we will see this mass movement declining? Who wants to go?
Yes.
Bruno.
Yeah, I think it's very important what Professor Norrie says about the different roles we have in democracy, that being in government is certainly another role as an executive branch than to be in parliament as a legislative one or the citizens as the sovereign. And to see these different roles in a democracy is also seeing how an infrastructure for democracy should be entertained, and the political parties are key elements of an infrastructure for democracy because they can ensure a certain stability over a long time, and they can ensure that dialogue is really the key of each democracy. And this is the very fundamental idea of a democracy, is to have dialogue before the decision. This was already in ancient Greek like that, but what has happened is that we became too much focused on the government delivery part and too lazy in engaging everybody else in also the dialogue. And this now backlashes in this kind of very ugly way of populist movements, which are not in a way trying to empower or engage citizens, but to take their votes to become representatives in a very quick fix way. I mean, Marine Le Pen says au nom du peuple. It's in the name of the people. She is not that the people should have a say, but she wants to be the representative of the part of the people as such. And this, of course, is a big challenge. Then we have, of course, also a long tradition of discussing these issues. Many established democracies have struggled about how this dialogue can be ensured best, which kind of engagement structure should be there. And again, in most countries, you can say that political parties have lost much of their role in being the real interface between the citizens and the government structure. They engage, even if there are still some members, not so many anymore. And this is in contrast, you can say, to the big amount of people in most democracies who are interested and want to be part of it, up to 80-90%, but only a couple of percent are members of parties. I want to finish with something Christian said about the use of popular votes on issues, referendums. I mean, it's maybe not the best example to say that when you have many votes that the responsible saving is not really experienced. I mean, Switzerland is exactly the experience where politicians would like to spend a lot, and the people very often do say no, and Switzerland is maybe not the most spending country with the highest tax rates you could imagine.
Okay. Thank you. Who wants to go on? Who?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I think the question you asked is that should we expect, if everybody's focusing on mobilising, to this decreased engagement? And I think that, I mean, you learn by experience, and I think that a lot of people are learning that mobilisation isn't the only way to go. There was an extreme hype when social media came, and all of a sudden you saw that you could put out a picture and all of a sudden get 100 likes, and everybody thought, wow, this is great, this is the saviour for democracy. But in the end, it sort of like didn't really pan out that way. And so what we're now seeing is people are actually starting to focus on these things like organising. There is a great, a couple of Harvard University students have created something after the election of Donald Trump called Resistance School. Yeah, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to sort of, build the next movement against Trump. And one of the key things that they're focusing on is how to actually organise people. And I think that's a great thing. I think that people are starting to sort of say, okay, well, this mobilising, this was great, but we actually need to sort of focus on this other thing as well and create this cocktail of engagement for people to get involved. And I think that we're learning from our mistakes and moving forward. And I think that, we, even though it seems quite dark, I think the future is quite bright, actually, because we have this wealth of experience now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barenti.
Well, here I think I can agree quite a lot with my social democratic colleague here. No, but of course we need to mobilize, and we also have to differ between, because of course all parties hunt voters, we need votes. But in the long term, we also need we need members, we need candidates, we need engaged people, and they are the key role in order to win support and trust among to win the voters. And to be positive, I can also see that we have never been this party with we haven't had trade unions with compulsory membership in our party or anything like the church and compulsory membership or anything. So, but we have decreased in members throughout the years as well. What we can see now is that the party is not growing that much, but the youth organization is growing. So we can see that many young people comes into the youth organization, and we can also see the people who comes into our party. Because we get a lot of new members in the parties, but we also lose a lot because of age reasons. But they come from the youth organizations, so we are extremely depending on well-functioning youth organizations that are able to observe the young, interested population. And I think the best way to breed populism is to create a gap between citizens, ordinary citizens and politicians, and I think we need to see politicians as ordinary citizens as well. And no matter if I'm in parliament or if I'm in my local city council, I need to have daily contacts with my electorate. And Sweden have very strong political parties. We haven't had a strong personal voting system. We have increased that a bit, and I think that is very good for the vitality for the democracy, because we need to be out there, and we cannot come out 6 months before the election, because we will not be able to win the election in the last 6 months. We need the next election campaign start the day after the election, basically, because you need to work with your constituency all the time, and if you are able to get more people active, I think they are also able to win support among a lot more people as well. So I think that is, if we manage to do that, we have the potential for success for that party who does. And we cannot wait. We need to mobilize, but we need, in that case, also to organize. And we shouldn't wait for the people to come to us. We need to be where the people are. No matter if they are in social media or if they are in a football game or if they are elsewhere.
Thank you very much. I think this is quite an interesting discussion.